How are you?
Hi, Ginger. So good to see you again. Here we are,
Here we
Hospice
are.
Midwives, at it again.
We're at it again, man, and it's a really big day. We've been waiting for this day.
We have. We're so excited. So excited.
Yeah, I think our listeners will catch up with us when we jump into our guests. But we're going to start with new news, which continues to be something I think a lot of our listener base appreciates. The diversity of the topics, but this one, as I do with most, I try to tie into our guest. So we'll see what happens as the conference, as this topic gets moving along. So this was in the Aspen NPR News 2 days ago, and that would be in Colorado. And it's a very long interview and an article about midwives in Colorado. And I'm just going to read a little bit of the transcript from the NPR interview just to set the tone here. I think it's important to share that we are certified nurse midwives. We value multiple pathways into midwifery education, and one of them is the certified professional midwife. And this is in particular reference to CPMs in the state of Colorado suing the regulatory bodies that oversee their licensure. So there's a midwife named Juliana Guy who first saw her a home birth experience in the village of rural Guatemala. I think you've been there, Denise.
I have been there.
And during her time in the Peace Corps in the 1980s, she was highly involved in traditional birth experiences and came back to the U.S. and decided she wanted to be a midwife, but she had a master's in public health and did not want to become a nurse. So she took the CPM, Certified Professional Midwife route, and practiced in Colorado's Western Slope, of which I'm not sure what that is, until the early 2000s, and describes it as some of the state's most rural and underserved communities, which we know is in a major crisis right now. After more than 2 decades of practicing, that's a long time for a solo midwife doing home birth.
It is.
She has now joined a group of direct entry midwives in a class action lawsuit filed last week in the Colorado agency, the Direct Entry Midwife Registration Agency in the Division of Professions and Occupations, with a lawsuit on bias and discrimination by regulators. So I'm going to set the article aside now and just say my take on it is, we've had midwives come to us frustrated with disciplinary and administrative board reporting. So they are reported to the Board of Nursing or their licensure board. And that can take months, as we know, to go through the process of investigation and conclusion and decision making. Many of them lose their hospital privileges. Many of them are without money if their jobs are put on hold for a while. And there seems to be a preponderance of the CPMs in Colorado reported to the disciplinary boards of over 500 days before review and decision making.
500. Oh.
500 days.
So they're sitting in limbo for 500 days.
And they can't practice because CPMs are regulated in the state of Colorado, which they are not in Kansas and in a lot of other states. But that means there's no providers
for those areas
to cover those areas, and especially those families who choose home birth. So what are your thoughts?
I think it's horrific. I think we're really, this is benefiting no one. And the punishment for what may be actually real or not real is the problem. Who is making these decisions?
Right.
And actually the punishment then falls upon those birthing people in that area and their babies. Yeah. So I think that's tragic.
It's really unfortunate that they believe, and I think there's some pretty substantive evidence with comparative data with physicians and nurses and midwives before disciplinary boards having decisions within half or less the time, but they seem to be biased against. And I think it's an example of the confusion, and maybe our guest will learn a little bit from us about the confusion of midwifery in the United States and how discrimination can happen in a variety of ways. But this is one example of how my son that just graduated from law school said on a podcast a few weeks ago, if I can't figure out what a midwife is and a midwife delivered me, we got a problem in the United States. And we do. So there's a lot of things that become conflated when you just hear that word. What is a midwife? So I thought it was worth sharing. It's very relevant news, and it's definitely going on in Colorado, which is a pretty liberal, independent practicing state for certified nurse midwives. But they're
I
paid
just
really
keep
poorly
thinking
there.
about it's affecting the third side,
It is. It
right?
is.
Which
It
we'll get
is.
into.
Yeah. So let's just get there right now.
Let's do it. Let's do
I
it.
rarely script anything. People who know me well know I don't do this, but man, I'm slightly nervous. So here we go. I want our listeners to understand why we chose this title of our podcast, which takes a while to practice saying it, and then people go, "What the heck does that mean?" Um, there's a series of life experiences that I've had at the ripe age of 70. When 3 summers ago, I enrolled in the Harvard Business School negotiation mastery course. And why? Because I was very envious of my lawyer husband who had attended in person the Harvard Law School mediation course, and he was really good at it, and I wanted to be that good. Um, through my years of leadership on the national level, I can't tell you how many times I've referenced people to the book Getting to Yes. I've even read chapters out of it in high conflict meetings within our professional organization. And then this fortuitous moment happened last fall. I was wrapping up teaching a 9-month midwifery mastery course in consulting, and one of the students shared a book at our last meeting that she had found. And it was released in 2024, and I had no idea the book existed. And it's right behind me, called Possible: How We Survive and Thrive in an Age of Conflict. I immediately downloaded the book and listened to it twice. His storytelling was like a flint striking a fire in me. What if our consulting firm, Grow Midwives, could elevate our reach with greater emphasis and resources to help midwives embrace conflict instead of being afraid of it? Our barriers, as all of us know, are complex, they're chronic, they cause unnecessary restrictions on practice, and this often leads to early burnout and folks leaving our profession. So I decided to take a chance. On December 3rd, from 4 a.m. to 6:40 in the morning, I thought about writing an email. I searched his website and I hesitantly pushed send in an uncharacteristic long email asking if he would keynote our conference now this July. Not only was there an answer in less than 24 hours, which my husband was astounded by, but the answer was, in quote, yes. I would be delighted to join you and your colleagues for a discussion of what is possible for midwives to face these critical challenges today as carers for our babies and communities in need. I'll link his robust bio to our podcast platforms over a 50-year career, but I'm going to start using the words on the website with this leading question. How do we deal with our deepest differences without destroying everything we hold dear? From the halls of Harvard to the depths of Kentucky coal mines, from the White House Crisis Center to the deserts of Botswana, from corporate boardrooms to war zones in the Middle East, Korea, and Ukraine, William Ury has devoted his life to answering this one question that first sprang in his mind as a boy growing up under the shadow of the atomic bomb amidst quarrels with his family at the dinner table. Don't we all have those? Traditionally trained as an anthropologist, Ury went on to co-found Harvard's program on negotiation and co-authored the world's all-time best-selling book on negotiation, Getting to Yes. Today, William Ury, this is a highlight of my career. It ranks right up there alongside sitting in the second row in the East Wing when it was still there in the White House with Presidents Clinton, Biden, and Vice President Harris, 2 rows in front of me. It is my greatest honor to introduce you. Denise?
I can't really follow that up so eloquently, but all I want to say is when Ginger brought up the idea that our podcast would be called The Possibilist Midwife, everything made sense to me. The framework, when you listen to Ury's work, it makes so much sense. And actually, once you start listening to that, you're going to actually go back and probably pull up all the TED Talks and the books and spend all your walking your dog moments like I do, listening to all of those. Because what better way? It makes sense. The messages are clear, they're kind, they're compassionate, they're based off of connection with people, they're based off of listening, and really resolving conflict. And being a middle child, like that is my role in life, as part of with my twin, we resolve conflict. We have to do that. And then as a midwife, um, we listen. We midwife means, really with women to listen to women. And so this makes sense. And we really do work in a world where we have a lot of barriers. So I love William Ury. And we are fangirls. But I also want to say that I feel like we're partners. So welcome.
It's a huge pleasure, Ginger and Denise. Really, I feel like partners. When I received that email from you, Ginger, I was touched. I was tickled to think of possibilist midwives because for me, the little that I've understood about midwives is you bring possibility
Oh,
onto this planet. I
yeah,
mean, that's the birth of possibility.
yeah,
I remember having the pleasure of holding my grandson for an hour in my arms on the day he was born, and just kind of gazing into his eyes and just seeing pure possibility. And for
yeah,
me, you're in touch with that, and that's really where the hope lies for this world in these days of such challenging times.
yeah, absolutely.
So I'm touched and delighted and honored to join this podcast.
It's probably not your typical interview, right? I heard you with Simon Sinek. He's another one that I've, read all of his books, and we really believe in that concept of why as a grounding, statement. Um, but our profession is really challenged, as we've shared a little bit. The barriers are chronic. And it's almost like as an oppressed and yet the oldest profession on the planet, right? It's really an oppressed profession. And when we work with midwives weekly, on, how do I have this conversation about being a full-time employee, but they're making me work 70 hours a week and I get no remuneration for that. They're afraid, right? Their first reaction is fear to learn how to navigate that conflict. And I think so much of what you bring is important for midwives to understand they can learn, right? Instead of freezing, or being
Right.
or being
Right.
angry.
Yeah. Yeah, I really do think so, Ginger. Like the midwives that are out there working, they work hard. They pour their whole heart and soul into listening to women and birthing people, and really trying to, create the experience that they would love to have. But they're tired. They're very tired, and so I've been in my career accused of being negative, and I said, actually, I'm a realist. And then one day I said, nope, I'm a possibilist now. So let's talk about the possibilist, the possibilities for midwifery here,
That's so
and for all the
beautiful.
little Diegos that are in the world.
That's it. And now has a little brother. His name is Raphael.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, it's that they're my bosses. I see
Yeah,
myself right now
I
after
I
50
understand
years
that. I got
of
those too.
I'm
Ginger,
working for
yeah,
them and their whole generation,
Yeah,
just like how do we create a world in which they can grow up and thrive?
yeah,
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 And in this
and can
really whirling world, and it's so poignant to me. I have the deepest respect for midwives, and it's like I was just saying to you, it's kind of like an endangered tribe. It's
yeah,
kind of like as an
yeah,
anthropologist, we often study
yeah,
endangered tribes, and it
yeah.
feels to me like and the indigenous tribes are the oldest tribes on
Yes,
the planet, and the
yes,
midwives are one of the oldest tribes on the planet.
yes. They are. Yes, they are.
They go way back to time immemorial. I mean,
Yeah,
it's like, I mean, that was the original form of birth. I
Right.
was always, I mean, for, as an anthropologist, that does, we've been around for several million years, and for 99% of that time, the only people delivering babies were midwives.
Right,
Right.
right.
And
Right.
so our whole heritage, our whole psychology, our whole everything gets formed in that birth experience, which was
Right.
through the grace and love of midwives.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Well, we saw the major changes happening in the US with the modernization of obstetrics that really happened in the US. I mean, Europe sort of was, and still today, lean on midwives as the primary gatekeeper of pregnancy. The midwives might not, they don't care for, 100% of the population exclusively, but they are who you go see when you find out you're pregnant. In the United States, that is the opposite.
It
In
is.
fact, most people believe you are supposed to see a physician. And if you happen to see a midwife, you're going to hear from a lot of people, why are you doing that?
Yeah.
So we have a culture in the United States that has medicalized this experience with the belief set that you are sick until you're proven healthy. And so for us as a profession to battle the sociological lens, right? The majority of people in America do not know what a midwife is. I ask every Uber, Lyft, and taxi driver I ever get in the car with, and that was almost all of the month of May. They don't know.
They don't know.
And so, if you believe in the tipping point theory, we're at about 13, 14% of all vaginal births in the US are attended by midwives, but we need it higher. We need 18, 20 before the before before people really go, oh, a midwife. Yeah, cool. I want one of those.
And the other thing really is like not only do we need more births, there's a need for more healthcare providers in so many areas of the United States. The rural areas are desperately low. There's maternity care deserts where there are no providers, and yet there aren't there aren't enough of us having some support to go out to work in those areas.
So I'm gonna ask you a tough question and just see where you can spin off of this because these really are systemic issues. And everything comes down to individual conversations. But when you're looking at big institutions or the payers, uh, we will leave pharma out of it for now because they're really not too involved. But um, the health systems, the medical associations, the payers who are fighting constantly for their piece of the pie, it becomes an economic battle a lot of times. And so, how do you approach that when you're not as highly educated, don't have the same scope of services, you don't have the community sort of out there rallying on your behalf? It's complicated.
Very, very complicated. Um, I'll just, I'm a kind of student of systems,
Yeah.
and you mentioned it's a systemic problem. And actually, it's not a problem you can solve
Hmm.
in the normal way in which we think of solving. It's not going to be like one organization that solves a problem. It's you have thousands and thousands of midwives. Um, you have all the people who've benefited from those midwives. In other words, the community around midwives that has
Hmm.
been supporting midwives, that has benefited from midwives, that has been born through midwives, that
Hmm.
have used midwives. And what it requires when you're up against those odds of an economic system,
Yeah.
a money system, a power system, a professional barrier system, a regulatory system,
Right.
it requires creating and knitting together a coalition, what I would call a winning coalition. What does it take to create a winning coalition, which is a complex adaptive coalition that can morph, that can change, and that's how you get systems change. And actually, I think midwives have a couple things going from them as I listen to you. One is the ability to listen.
Mm,
That is in such short supply in our culture. We have talk shows. We
yeah,
need listen shows. You know, everyone's on social media talking to each other, but who's actually
yeah,
listening to each other, right?
yeah.
And midwives, they're inherently listening. They're listeners. They're listening even for what, even in the process, I can imagine of assisting a birth is listening to the mother,
Hmm.
listening to the baby, listening to what's wanting to happen, listening
Yeah.
to what's the right moment. So you have attuned ears. Listening is what, and listening gives you the capacity to listen to each other. You also are, I can imagine, you know, the process of giving birth is it's a collaborative process
Hmm.
between the mother, the midwife, all the
Hmm.
people around. And so it's like, and even the infant is, it's a complex collaboration that's going on. So if you have the ability to listen and collaborate, you have the two essential skill sets that are necessary to build a coalition,
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
weave relationships. And that's where the power comes from. Because essentially, if you're just one solitary midwife, like that story you told about, the midwife out in Colorado,
Right.
in order to, you just have to think of what, even in order to launch that lawsuit, she had to
Yeah.
build a coalition.
Yes.
She had to get the
Mhm.
support to do that.
Yeah.
And that's what's needed is a kind of uh, collaborative listening coalition that listens to the adversaries.
Hmm.
That's the key too. It's not
Hmm.
just to go into battle, because undoubtedly that even that, most lawsuits, including probably that lawsuit, will eventually be settled through negotiation.
Yeah.
So why wait for the negotiation? Start the negotiation, even as it's important to launch that lawsuit in order to level
Yeah.
the playing field of power, to get people to take you seriously.
Yeah.
But then you got to begin the negotiation. And the essence of negotiation is listening, understanding what your interests are, what are the needs and interests that you're trying to protect that are so important in this case, which is, for example, the livelihood of midwives and their ability to sustain themselves in order to
Yeah.
serve the communities that they serve, many of which are underserved communities. So
Right.
and so it requires, Denise was just mentioning what I call the third side, which is a name for the community, the
Yeah.
surrounding whole. You have to find a way to mobilize and activate that. And it's done through conversations, one at a time, building relationships, knitting together that coalition. And that together can start to create the necessary power to then to negotiate, to sit down at the table with people who might be the regulators or might be
Yeah.
the insurance industry or whoever it
Yeah.
is, to actually forge agreements that address some of their interests,
Yeah.
but protect the interests and advance the
Yeah.
cause of midwifery.
So here's an interesting thought. We had the incoming president of the American College of Nurse Midwives on last time, and Peter was the division director of JPIGO's maternal child health division for 20 years through Johns Hopkins, and so Peter knows a lot about global midwifery. And I questioned him about this concept, but we call it unions, right? The Royal College of Midwives in England is a union. And we see unionization happening in our country with physicians, with residents, with midwives, certainly with nurses, which is sort of where it all started. I think some of the people who are going to be listening feel so disempowered and so disengaged. What do you think about unions in healthcare?
It's
Well,
a good
I'll
question.
just tell you something. When I started almost 50 years ago in the field of negotiation, I was a student of anthropology, and and I was looking for any kind of experience that would get me out of the library
Yeah.
and get my hands dirty, as it were. And I got a job as a mediator in a coal mine in Kentucky. And and you know, my colleague and I, we got down there, and the miners were going out on strikes. I mean, this is kind of Eastern Kentucky, Appalachia, really
Yeah.
poor, underserved communities. I spent a lot of time inside the mine, and I learned the history of unions there,
Okay.
Mm.
because you know, back in the 18 between 1875 and 1925, the United States had the bloodiest labor relations history of any country on earth. There were hundreds of people killed, thousands injured in pitched battles as workers who were almost held almost as slaves, because
Yeah.
like back then, the company controlled everything. The
Yeah.
company controlled, the company didn't even pay you in money. They paid you in script that you could only use at the company store.
Oh my
And
Mm.
God.
so if the foreman, imagine you had a family, and in those days they had big families, like 7, 8, 9, 10
Yeah.
kids, whatever it is. And imagine the foreman didn't like you and fired you. Your family would be out on the street because you lived in a company house.
Yeah.
You would have nothing. And so the
Mm.
power that
Yeah.
industry had over workers was so inequitable. And when the workers tried to unionize, management brought in armed guards who were like private armies, and
Jeez.
they opened up fire, and
Jeez.
Mm.
hundreds of workers were killed. So there were pitched battles. There was the Battle of Blair Mountain. So the union movement was born out of incredible inequity and injustice in this country.
Yeah.
And it was a response to there's got to be a better way.
Yeah.
And the workers need to have some power to be able to negotiate
Yeah.
the terms of the labor contract. So
Yeah.
when there's huge inequities of power, building a coalition in the form of a union makes obvious sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and it's rapidly rolling out in healthcare. So some of the ethical and sociological questions, we've been talking about earlier is, so what happens to patient care, when you go on strike?
Right.
Um, it becomes very maybe very different. I don't know if the coal mine shuts down and you don't have access to energy. I guess that could be as important, but um, there are some sociology researchers at UCSF in California studying unionization of midwives right now. Their publication should probably come out this fall, but I personally see it as the most obvious route to gain a coalition movement.
It is. And just to say, striking is not the only tool for a
Hmm.
union.
That's true.
It's usually the last resort.
Right.
And there's just power in numbers, in showing up in
Yeah.
numbers. If you have, let's imagine you're in a workplace and you have a problem with your boss, right? If you show up and it's just your boss, there's a power inequity, right?
Right.
But if you show up with three colleagues,
Yeah.
say we've got a
Yeah.
problem,
Yeah.
the boss then says it's not just the boss doesn't just fear a strike. Maybe it's not even a strike. It just boss says, wait a minute,
Yeah.
uh, you know, I might be able to handle one, but I can't handle like four
Yeah.
or five. And what if they leave? It's like,
Right.
or what if they're unhappy? There's immediately, I'll give you an example from a different, maybe about 30, 40 years ago. I was really interested in, as an anthropologist, also in how our primate cousins deal with conflict.
Okay.
And I
Mm.
went to visit, I was working with President Carter at the time. And right near Atlanta, there's a world famous research lab studying chimpanzees. And there was a world famous scientist there by the name of Franz de Waal. And I went to visit him, and he's not just studying chimpanzees. We mostly know what are called common chimps, but there's a smaller breed called bonobos. And I don't know if you've heard of bonobos, but anyway,
No.
they're even a closer cousin of ours than the chimp is. And and what's so interesting, he described to me how he watched. I remember this is he watched a male bonobo, a male chimp, kind of harassing a female chimp and pushing her around. And then he watched as 4 or 5 of these females lined up like linebackers on an American football team and just gradually pushed the male back. And it was like the male, is stronger than one, but is not
Yeah.
stronger than 5.
Yeah.
And that is a coalition.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
how our
Yeah.
ancestors always
Yeah.
dealt with things. When there's an equity of power, you form a coalition.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
that's what's needed to
Yeah.
bring because to have, I've devoted my life to negotiation, but negotiation without power,
Yes.
you know, if you don't have some sense of power, and it's not power in a negative sense, it's power
Right.
empowered. It's
Right.
Yeah.
power with each
Yeah.
other,
Yeah.
not power against the other, but just
Right.
power with each other. And that's what they had. They had
Yeah.
that power with each other. Those female bonobos, I've never forgot that
Yeah.
story. And it's like that's the secret.
And I think what we're seeing, because we have a lot of clients that are practices with 3 midwives, 5 midwives, 10 midwives, and maybe one or two are ready to coalesce and like put together all the data needed to make the case and start the conversation. And then you have one or two or three who are terrified they're going to lose their job. They're the major wage earner, carry the health insurance. They're afraid.
They feel
So
threatened.
so fear becomes the immobilizing factor, and everything stops. Because as midwives, we want to stay together. And so what we're trying to help people understand is starting the conversation is not going to lead to your loss of the job. You just need to begin the conversation. And I don't know if it's because many feel oppressed in their jobs, many are exhausted, many are tired. They've tried before and gotten pushed away. That the apathy is reigning right now, and the escape route, William, is leaving the profession. We have midwives leaving in the highest percentage ever that have been in their career for less than 10 years. And these are graduate educated, master's, doctoral level people whose average student loan debt is $150,000 walking away from their jobs because
Mm.
they can't do it anymore. And so what we're trying to do is channel your work and the skill set to say you can try. You have to at least be willing to try, and we'll help you kind of gather that data and build your leverage and give you some confidence. But man, um, it's even post COVID, Denise. I may be wrong, but I think it's worse now than it was before.
I mean, I think it is worse. I'm sitting here listening, and I think those that are most effective are those that are working, the longer hours and their ability to have the energy to come together. In addition to the fear is pretty substantial. So, I think they like will generally retreat because there's this need to be a little bit self-protective, and how can I go forward and fight when I'm just making it day to day as well?
You
Big
know,
classic burnout.
I hear that, and I see that in a lot of actually activists generally,
Mm,
in other sectors. Burnout is a huge factor. I mean, right now we just have a world that's roiling
Yeah,
in in issues and problems. I work with
yeah,
people who work in the peace field, for example, and they're experiencing a high rate of burnout, just similar
yeah,
to midwives and and one thing I would say, a couple things. What I've learned, and even for myself, working in a lot of, I'm working right now in Ukraine, and I'm working in the Middle East, and I'm working on Iran, and it's very easy reading the news is so thickly negative. It's really
yeah,
easy to get paralyzed. And so a
yeah.
couple of things I would just pass on is just, it's so important to resource yourself
Mm,
in these times. In other words, what is it that gives you energy, that gives
Mm,
you
Mm.
joy, that gives you, like, for example, working. I work in a lot of war zones, so I like to live in nature. Just
Yes.
yeah,
that's for me. That's that's kind of a universal resource. Not everyone
yeah,
has immediate access to it, but I live in nature. I walk.
yeah,
Some people meditate, some people
yeah,
do yoga, some people they talk with friends. Whatever it is, it's your way. I like to call it my way of going to the balcony. In other words,
yeah,
the balcony is this you're living in a hard world. You're about to, dealing with such a situation, your boss or whatever the situation is, the ability to step back for a moment,
yeah,
Mhm.
even just simply breathing is a way of resourcing yourself because you're just bringing oxygen,
yeah,
just resting, just taking 5 minutes or taking 15 minutes or whatever it's a working out or whatever your favorite thing is to do that make sure that you realize how much stress you're under
yeah,
and that
Mhm.
you balance it with being an equal amount of resourcing. And the
yeah,
more stress, the more resourcing you need. And
yeah,
everyone has their favorite way of doing it. And I can't imagine doing the work I do without like being able to walk in beauty and in nature. Just even looking
yeah,
at a flower, I mean,
yeah,
but just it's just like nature, just like it just calms your nervous system. It
yeah,
regulates your nervous system because what happens is what does burnout come from? It comes from our nervous systems. Either we get hyper active, which is like fear, anxiety, rage, anger. I mean, because in response to these situations, we go into hyperactivated,
yeah,
or we drop then into hypoactivation,
right,
which is resignation, despair,
yeah,
sadness, depression, all of that. In between the hyper and the hypo is a band, is a zone. Psychologists will call it the zone of the optimal zone, the zone of
mhm,
the window of tolerance is sometimes what it's
yeah,
called.
yeah,
And that's where we need to be at our best. It's
yeah,
like
Mm.
we still have emotions. It's not about
yeah,
suppressing your emotions. It's on the
yeah,
opposite. It's about listening to your emotions
yeah,
and
good
listening to
point.
yourself, listening to the fear. It's not about suppressing the fear or
Yeah,
suppressing the anger. It's listening to it, but you still have the ups and downs, but it's within that band. And
yeah,
we need to make sure that we stay in that band. Otherwise, burnout comes from being hyperactivated and then being hypoactivated.
yeah,
Hyperactivated, hypoactivated. And so if we can learn to do that for ourselves, to regulate our own nervous systems, if we can then learn to help others around us and we can co-regulate, we
yeah,
can help. And that's in order to maintain our our both our effectiveness as well as our personal life satisfaction, of course, which
yeah,
and there's a correlation between the two.
yeah, yeah. We do a bit of facilitation with midwife practices that are struggling, with state affiliates that are part of the national organization. And one of the exercises I have them do is a SWOT and a PESTLE survey before I go, just to get an analysis of the landscape and sort of get a feel. And sometimes we're talking about highly conflicting issues within our organization. And we'll just say reproductive choice is one of those highly conflicting issues within our profession, and OBGYNs as well, I'm sure. And it can be so polarizing, the group just won't go any further. But when you sort of put the landscape out on the wall and begin to find ways to say, let's set that aside and find out what's common here, it's amazing the power of what the group can do. But it takes somebody to facilitate that, William.
It
People,
takes the third cider.
there you go. I mean, I really think it does, and that's your work. Really, I think amplifies that
Yes.
the value of that, whether we want to call it mediation or whatever. The outside is critically important.
Really, really, really important to deploy that because, you know, to actually have a conversation on a polarized topic without creating a safe enough context in which people
Yeah,
can feel safe enough to both speak their truth and be heard, and
Right.
be in a respectful context. If you can create that, you can move through almost everything. You can move through almost, including such a hot button issue as reproductive choice.
Yeah.
I remember, gosh, years and years ago, I had a friend who was doing a third sider in those kind of conversations with it was in Boston. It was a group of nuns, and then some some advocates, and they had a year-long conversation, and it was astonishing how as soon as they could actually listen to each other, hear each other's personal stories,
Yeah.
and they found, wow, there's so much we can agree upon, like, for example, reducing teenage pregnancy, for example,
Yes.
which actually takes care of the issue so much more effectively than any
Yes.
battle does. And,
Oh,
and it's
you're so
like
right.
reducing unwanted teenage pregnancy. I mean, like that alone,
Yeah.
if we took even like 10% of the energy that goes into that fight and
Yeah.
put it into like do that, it would have so much greater impact
Yeah.
Hmm.
on the issue that everyone cares about than anything. So, it's astonishing.
I love your example. I'll tell you why. The MMWR and CDC just put out their latest report. We are
Yeah,
at an all-time low of teen pregnancy in the United States. All-time low.
really.
Yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It
And
is
I mean, and,
amazing.
and, and you know what? That is probably not known publicly widely at all. And that's astonishing progress. Do you know we're also at I mean, you would never know this, but in most of our major cities, we're at a lower level of violence and criminality. And you would
You'd
never,
never know
never
that.
know that if
Yeah.
you look at the statistics,
Yeah.
homicides have been going down widely across. You'd never get that idea. We flood ourselves through social media with
Yes.
Yes.
so much
Yeah.
fear information that drives our
Yeah.
nervous systems into paralysis that we think, oh, it's hopeless, so might as well do nothing, or it's like
The
uh,
overstimulation of fear and terror.
it is, and the algorithms of the
Mm,
social media thing are designed. They're designed
To
to create
trigger.
fear or whatever
Yeah.
because that's what gets more engagement for them, and that's what allows them to sell more ads. So
Right.
we're creating a kind of um, almost like a self-destruction machine in the way in which we
self-sabotage.
communicate. Yeah, no, and our ability to free ourselves from that is key because um, most Americans, for example, they think, we're all at odds with each other. Americans, whatever it is. But when you go out and talk to your neighbors, mostly, most people in America, and, even with people of differing opinions and so on, I
Right.
live in a place where, it's purple, but,
Yeah.
people just, they're just,
Yeah.
they're your neighbors. You just,
Right.
and so there's so much more possibility than we can imagine. And
Yeah.
and and our biggest adversary is ourselves, is our
Mm,
own despair.
Mm.
And
mhm.
and uh and because right now, if I was an anthropologist from Mars and studying the human species right now, and I'd come down, I'd scratch my head, and I'd say, "Wow, it's amazing what these creatures are able to do," and all through collaboration and cooperation. I mean, the most
Yeah.
amazing systems they've set up, the most amazing scientific technologies, and whatever. It's astonishing. And the only thing that's in the way of them dealing with all these complex problems that they face, whether it's hunger or midwifery or war or anything like that, is they're having a little trouble getting to yes, right? But that's entirely up to us. And
Yeah.
we have it within us. I mean, we're designed to be intensely collaborative creatures. We are. I mean,
Yeah.
language, everything is designed,
Yeah.
we naturally relate to each other. If we can deploy these inherent human gifts, then we can create the world that we want our children to
Yeah.
grow up in.
I agree. You mentioned collaboration, and we've been speaking about a lot of the barriers. But the reality is there's a lot of good that is able to happen, and a lot of good that is happening, and we do call them, collaborative models of practice. And these are happening in many, many settings. which are absolutely in stark contrast to the areas that are obviously struggling. But I do think highlighting and remembering that those are where some great successes are. And
You
and
work
so
in one, Denise. I mean,
I'm
you work
speaking
in
from
one.
my heart. I'm speaking from my heart because I happen to be working in a large academic setting where over the years, this our ability to of the midwives to work with the physicians and and to have a very cohesive learning respectful team has really grown exponentially. So we have, doubled our number of midwives that are working in our practice. People want to come to work, and we work with some amazing physicians who find the value and benefit of working with the midwives. Um, and so much so that, we now see a lot of their patients for many things that they don't have the energy or the time to see. So I do want to highlight that absolutely beautiful word of collaboration.
That's astonishing, Denise, and that's
Yeah.
also it's so vital to highlight success stories.
Yes.
Mhm.
What actually works, because there's so much focus on what doesn't work, which is
Right.
important to pay attention to, but it's also important to pay attention to what works.
Mhm.
Yeah.
In order to get a sense of to be a possibilist, you have to kind of almost
Yeah.
envision a future state. For example, it would be wonderful, for example, to get midwives together and imagine, let's say it's 10 years from now. And midwifery has gone through a revolution and it's now like you're at 18,000, you're at 20,000, you're
Yeah.
25,000, whatever it is, you're, you
One
know,
million strong.
you exactly, you've hit the tipping point. Imagine that. If you can just kind of just let yourself, for example, the power of the imagination is so important. Imagine that. Imagine that's 10 years from now. It's like you're doing a diary entry and you
Yeah.
say, wow, that's astonishing what's happened in the last 10 years. We could never have believed it 10 years ago. And then from that point, you use that and you say, okay, how did we get there? And you start to work backwards. So often when we face an issue or problem, we don't see any way forward because the obstacles are so large. It's very hard to imagine going forward. But if we imagine the future and we work backwards, what seemed impossible becomes possible.
Yeah.
It's kind of a reverse engineering.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, and it maintains the concept of hope, which happened to be the main concept in my PhD. But
Yes, it
the
did.
World Health Organization made an announcement: we need a million midwives, right? We need globally a million midwives to
There we
save.
go.
We've got the call to action. Um, we need to spark it in the U.S., Denise, because
I do think so. And I really do want to move these all into those underserved areas, the areas without people. I think, if we had more money, I think it would happen sooner, but, you know, somehow that barrier will get to.
I still like the idea of the union conversation.
Okay, you know what? I don't think that's going to go to bed anytime soon. I like knowing the
Uh,
history of it as well. So
yeah, that
that's
was
very helpful.
fascinating. That was
And
Yeah.
I mean, I'll just say something about that history too, is that from 1875 to 1925, we had the most violent labor history. Then came collective bargaining and unions,
yeah,
and violence went way down. We actually, it was a huge success in this country to take an issue that seemed so charged and
yeah,
turn it from a destructive way to a constructive way through negotiation, through sitting down,
yeah,
negotiation, mediation. All of those things came out of
yeah,
that, the 1925 to 1945. It's just like in that period, there was this kind of realization that enough is enough. We need to find a better
yeah,
way.
Mm.
yeah, yeah. I think we're really close.
All right, it's on the list. It's on the list,
I
Ginger.
have a friend an economist who used to say, if it exists, it's possible. So if it's happened
Oh,
before in other contexts, it can happen in this context. And then,
absolutely.
yeah, no reason why it couldn't. In my life, I worked. I was in apartheid South Africa working, and it would seem like absolutely impossible. It was going to be race war forever and whatever. And I was there. Nelson Mandela was in jail. and then I came back like 4 or 5 years later, and the country totally transformed. Mandela was
Yeah.
president.
Yeah.
And the guy who'd been president when I was there was the deputy president, and they were working together. And
Yeah.
it was like,
How
what
did that happen?
happened?
How did it happen?
How did it
Yeah.
happen?
And what had happened was through the activation of the third side. It wasn't, and Nelson Mandela was an incredible leader, and de Klerk was an incredible co-leader in that sense, but
Yeah.
they didn't even like each other. There wasn't good chemistry, but the whole society, the women's movement, the labor unions, the business
Yeah.
sector, the religious sector,
Yeah.
everyone got involved. So it was the whole society changed. I saw the same thing in Northern Ireland, which was, people said the Catholics and Protestants, they're going to be killing each other forever, and they drink the conflict of the mother's blood and everything. And the troubles and all this terrorists and military occupation and everything. And then again, I watched the same thing, which is it became possible. There was a
Yeah.
mindset shift. People said, oh, it's got to be a better way of doing it. And you know what? It started with the women, believe it or not. It was the
Oh, I
mother.
believe it.
It was the mothers and sisters of the victims on both
Yeah.
sides, Catholic and Protestant,
Yeah.
who said, enough is enough. And they met. And because they were mothers and sisters of people who were
Yeah.
revered as almost like martyrs,
Yeah.
okay, the woman, they can talk, whatever. But they opened up space.
Yeah.
And they took courage. And then the religious leaders, the priests and the ministers on both sides said, I'm not sure this is what Jesus Christ actually intended and whatever. And they began. So religious. Then they opened up space for the business people to say, this doesn't make any sense. We're losing a lot of jobs. We're driving
Yes.
all kinds of
Yes.
investment and everything. And then the politicians were last. But it started with the women.
Yeah. We have a window. I think, and I'm thinking as you're talking, and the name Olivia Walton, who just started a campaign to cut maternal mortality in half in 5 years. I'm on a maternal health advisory board for that working group. And Charles Johnson lost his wife, Kira, to a routine scheduled C-section many years ago. And Charles, a friend of mine, is the leading father voice for Black maternal mortality in our country. And Charles just did a big interview on Axio with some famous people and joined the movement. And much of the effort is focused on the business sector finally addressing maternal morbidity and mortality and including midwives and doulas. A lot of people don't know the difference between midwives and doulas, but I'm seeing this door opening more as we talk, William, in that collectively organizing our midwifery voices at that critically important table where there is money, there is business, power, all of it moving forward is an opportunity.
Wonderful.
It's
So there is
possible.
hope.
It's an opportunity. Yeah, I think
Really.
there is.
There are possibilities.
Love
Yeah,
it.
there are. I just got to get my mind working more.
We got to get to the table, Ginger.
We will. We
We got to get
will.
to the table. This is so exciting. Oh, so
I think what I've heard you talk a lot about is self-preservation, like resetting yourself as you prepare for these kinds of difficult experiences, and to acknowledge that the lows happen, right, along with the hyperactivity. That's just normal physiology. And in order to prepare effectively for a negotiation or walking into what you know is going to be high conflict, acknowledging that while setting it aside and not letting fear be the driver of the conversation.
That's it.
But what is possible is the driver of the conversation.
Yeah, if there's one lesson I've learned, it's kind of like befriend your fear.
Ah, great comment.
In other words, like you have that fear. Don't try and suppress the fear. Listen to the fear first of all.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and and honor the fear. It has a certain point to make, listen
Yeah.
to it, and
Yeah.
then usually proceed in the very direction that the fear says not to proceed in.
Mm,
In other words, but just move into that which I tend to avoid.
Yeah.
Move. A lot of us are conflict avoidant, right?
Yes.
And grew up. I grew up as you mentioned in a family with thing. So I got to be conflict avoidant. It was uncomfortable conflict. Conflict shut me down. And I learned to actually, conflict is not to see conflict as not as something bad. Conflict is normal. Conflict is that's how change takes place. There's going to be a lot of conflict for midwives to be able to, find their rightful place in society. It's how you engage, but you engage with it, and you almost like play with it, dance with it. Kind of like, okay, let's see, and you prepare for it. You prepare yourself with you get friends and colleagues and whatever, and you think about what your interests are, what you really want. You rehearse.
Yes.
If you're nervous about how you confront your boss, rehearse it with a friend
Yeah.
or a colleague and whatever, and just and think about how to make it easier so that just like you rehearse a speech, rehearse your negotiation,
Right.
and
yeah.
then just see what just move towards the thing that you fear.
So would you say like turn conflict into challenge?
I would say absolutely that. And I would say meet animosity with curiosity.
Ooh,
Ah, that's a good one.
that's a t-shirt slogan right there.
Because just be curious. Like, oh,
Yeah.
well, why is the boss angry? Or what's going on here? And like, isn't that interesting? And then
Yeah.
Yeah.
suddenly that thing that was afraid of, or, oh, that's interesting that I've got some
Yeah.
fear going on. I, in Possible, I give that example of me
Yeah.
with President Chavez,
Mm,
shouting at me like, spittle and, just you're a fool, you're this and that, and the other thing. President Chavez of Venezuela. And I kind of like, I was first taken aback, of course, get fear, like,
Yeah.
what's going
Back
on?
up.
And the president of the country is going to like putting, shouting at you in front of the whole cabinet. And then I was able to just remember a friend of mine from Ecuador actually had said, pinch the palm of your hand.
Uh-huh.
yeah.
And I said, Hernan, why would I
Yeah.
pinch the palm of my hand? He said, well, it'll give you a temporary pain. It'll keep you alert. And I pinched the palm of my hand and I was able to say, okay, what am I feeling? Okay, I'm feeling embarrassed, whatever. Why am I here? I'm here to calm the situation down. Is it really going to help if I get into an argument with the president of Venezuela?
Yeah.
No. Okay,
Yeah.
let me listen to him. And I just listen. And isn't that interesting? Why is he shouting at me? And I went to the balcony, that place of perspective where you're like
Yeah.
looking at yourself as if you're on a stage. And like, after 30 minutes, just watching his body language, his shoulders slowly sink.
Yeah.
And then he says to me in a kind of weary tone of voice, so, Yuri, what should I do? And that is the
Open the
faint
door.
sound of a human mind opening. And then I
Yeah.
was able to say, Mr. President, Señor Presidente, the whole country is on edge. And because there are a million people on the streets on one side, a million people on the streets on the other side, violence was breaking out. I said, why not?
Jeez.
It's almost Christmas. Why not just declare a truce, a tregua in Spanish, a truce, give everyone a few weeks just to go spend Christmas with their friends and their holidays. In other words, a cooling off period, a little breathing.
Yes.
He looks at me and he says, you know what? That's a great idea. I'm going to announce that in my next speech. And his mood had completely shifted.
Yeah.
Why? Through the power of not reacting,
Hmm.
Yeah.
but listening, and then waiting for that little moment of opportunity to take
Yeah.
someone, who was furious at me, and he turned it around and then he
Yeah.
invited me to go with him on a holiday. I mean, it was like,
Nice.
He's probably not used to people listening to him. They tune him out.
Right.
that's
They're
true.
scared of him. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, good information.
Well,
Yeah.
man, we could keep talking, but I know you're busier than we are. And, we get to welcome you back in July when you're speaking at our conference. And again, I can't thank you enough for giving so much to our
It's my
profession.
pleasure.
I
It's
really
my
can't.
pleasure, Ginger and Denise. It's a really huge pleasure. And I mean, the one thing I'll also say, last thing I'll say is midwifery is also a metaphor for what this whole society needs to do. Is we need to
Mm,
Mm,
midwife in the new.
Mm.
a new society, a new world. And
Yeah.
for me, it's always been when I think of midwifing, I think that's actually, we're hospicing the old civilization, AI,
Yeah.
everything. We're hospicing the old and we're midwifing the new. So for me,
Mm.
Wow.
Mm.
midwives are not just a profession. It's a vital,
It's a
It's an
verb.
action. It's an
it's an
action.
action, and it's what all of us need to do.
Yeah.
Yes, I love it. Thank
Well,
you.
are we gonna have that be your call to action? Because that was a pretty powerful one.
We always end with the call to
Oh,
action.
call to
So,
action, absolutely. And yeah, that would be a call to action. And I would just say, consider, the next time when someone asks you, are you an optimist? Are you a pessimist in this world? Responding as Denise does, I'm a possibilist. I
Yeah.
believe in human possibility.
Yeah. Great.
got it.
Denise,
Because
go
of
for
you,
it.
thank you for that great framework that you so eloquently always talk about and write about. Okay, my call to action. Ginger, I'm very curious about this union thing. I mean, I think something along that line. Let's join a union. Let's create a union of a national union of midwives in the United States. I don't know what we'll call it, but we'll call it something. That's my call to action.
I like that.
I want to find out more
Yeah,
because
I'm confident you're going to do some research, and I think we've got some leads.
yes, I think we
We've got
do.
some, and it's not the truckers union.
Oh
Uh,
no, 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 much more soft than that.
so my call to action is to strongly urge that people purchase the book, The Possibilist, and get it on Audible so you can
Get it
actually hear
on
William
Audible.
Ury tell the stories, because I'm sure I learn better listening. That's just my style. But you do such a remarkable job of integrating your storytelling with the lessons and the skills and the tools. This doesn't happen by osmosis. You have to practice this to become really effective and good and confident in your persuasive ability. And I've not read anything like it, nor is my husband, who's also listened to the book, and he's a master negotiator. At least many say that about him. So buy the book and sign up for our conference July 23rd for some incredible conversations that William Ury will be leading off, but other people, national speakers we've invited to help build the business savvy and the leadership savvy of our profession. So we were going to cut it off for today, and I don't know how we're going to top this, Denise.
I don't know. I don't know. We're just going to stay in the present and
We're going to stay in the present.
we're going to really enjoy the fact that we got to spend an hour with you, William, and so appreciate it.
It's been my joy, really, Denise and Ginger. So, and I wish all the midwives out there so much success in getting the yes.
Thank you.
My last dream, William, is that someday we take a walk together in the mountains.
I would love that. It's a date.
Okay, perfect.
Take care, and
Thank
thanks
you so
again
much.
so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye now.